Welcome to the Upside Journal podcast. In 2026, domestic venture capital is struggling with extended exit timelines and dry powder gridlock. Yet, a sophisticated layer of cross-border diaspora business networks is quietly unlocking predictable, counter-cyclical returns in AI and climate tech. Today, we're breaking down the hidden alpha traditional funds are missing. We are looking directly at the mechanics of managerial displacement through what we call the executive AI stack. This explainer is a clinical deconstruction of how 10 distinct categories of agentic AI are systematically replacing traditional middle management coordination work. So, let's dive right in.
Look, there's a stark contrast defining our current macro environment. For most of the 20th century, management essentially existed to solve an information bottleneck. A CEO couldn't personally track everything, right? So organizations built layers of managers whose primary job was just aggregation. As Gary Hamel and Michelle Zanini noted, the average span of control was strictly one manager per 4.7 workers. And that ratio is dictated almost entirely by how much status tracking a single human brain could absorb. But here in 2026, agentic AI completely shatters that ceiling. Software agents that read project boards, cross-reference budgets, and flag variances, they don't get tired at 40 direct reports. This shift from linear human aggregation to sublinear agentic coordination fundamentally alters the operating leverage of the entire enterprise. To uncover this hidden alpha, we're structuring today's briefing into 4 acts. First, the 2026 VC paradox. Second, the executive AI stock. Third, governance debt and supply chains. And finally, we'll cover the operator's playbook.
Act 1, the 2026 VC paradox. Let's look at the macro catalyst.
Before we analyze the stack itself, we really need to define the technology that's driving this displacement. Agentic AI refers to autonomous systems that plan, execute, and report multi-step workflows without constant human direction. The absolutely crucial point here is that this is not just a productivity story about faster spreadsheets. It's a structural shift in what a manager's job actually is. Gartner projects that 40% of enterprise applications will embed task-specific AI agents by the end of this year, driving an autonomous software market projected to reach $450 billion by 2035. This right here is the ultimate catalyst for the shift in enterprise architecture.
Moving on to Act 2, the executive AI stack, asymmetric information and talent verification. Now, rather than looking at specific vendors, we have to categorize this stack by function and by escalating governance risk. At the base, informational functions like status synthesis carry a low governance risk because, well, they merely aggregate data. Moving up a level, directive functions like resource allocation introduce medium risk as the agent actually begins making operational recommendations. And at the absolute peak, systemic functions like cross-functional orchestration carry a high governance risk. Understanding this risk hierarchy is the absolute prerequisite if you want safe deployment. We currently track 10 distinct agent categories that are absorbing this coordination work. You've got your informational tools, status synthesis, generating structured reports, and meeting intelligence, surfacing unresolved agenda items. Then you have directive tools, things like resource allocation, shifting budgets, performance signal agents tracking deal velocity, and financial variance agents flagging discrepancies. On the operations side, hiring pipeline and customer health agents handle candidate screening and churn prediction. Finally, at the systemic level, compliance monitoring scans contracts, strategic scenario agents run complex what-if modeling, and cross-functional orchestration sits at the very top, routing tasks seamlessly between entirely different departments. This brilliantly illustrates the core thesis of the stack, the critical bifurcation of labor. AI assumes the data-driven mechanics of coordination, the synthesis, the monitoring, the scheduling that used to eat up a first-line manager's entire Friday afternoon. However, the judgment layer, accountability, negotiation, and strategic decisions, that remains uniquely human. Think about it. When a status synthesis agent flags a delayed task, someone still has to decide whether that delay matters, and more importantly, they have to own the consequence. Leaders who conflate coordination with judgment risk automating the entirely wrong half of their management structure. Let's transition to Act 3, governance debt and supply chains, the risk profile. There is a staggering number we have to address right now, 89%. Gartner and IDC data reveal that 89% of AI agent pilots never successfully scale into production. They get trapped in experimental phases. Why? Because agents running continuously are generating API calls and consuming compute tokens 24/7. They end up accumulating cloud infrastructure costs way beyond initial estimates when the ROI isn't strictly measured. Following up on that, Gartner presents a fairly uncomfortable forecast. Over 40% of agentic AI projects will be canceled entirely by 2027. And look, this isn't a failure of the underlying large language models. It is an institutional failure. Organizations are ignoring early warning signs until costs just spiral out of control and autonomous systems violate internal policies. Drilling into the specific institutional fears driving these failures, the reality on the ground is pretty clear. 76% of enterprises cite data privacy, 71% cite AI hallucinations, and 68% point to a lack of identity security controls. By giving agents access to multiple systems without proper access protocols or simple kill switches, companies are creating massive security exposures. We define the systemic problem as governance debt. This occurs when organizations automate the coordination work management was essentially built to hide without addressing the accountability gap left behind. The uncomfortable truth is that most organizations are deploying directive agents without a named human owner. Removing the manager who used to do the reporting simply makes the absence of a clearly accountable human way more visible and significantly more costly when a system misfires. To see this in action, climate tech supply chains serve as the ultimate stress test. Agents are now orchestrating complex sourcing, dynamically replanning transport, and optimizing inventory flows across borders to lower logistics costs and emissions. But this is exactly why operators must sequence informational agents before deploying complex directive agents. For African and diaspora-linked enterprises, there is an unusual advantage here. Operating lean by necessity means less legacy management overhead to unwind. But if an agent makes an autonomous decision on a cross-border shipping route, the underlying data infrastructure must be flawless, and a named human owner absolutely must hold the liability. Which brings us to Act 4, the operator's playbook, the repeatable flywheel framework. Adopting this stack is a strict sequencing problem, not a single procurement decision. You must start with low-risk informational synthesis agents. From there, instrument clean data infrastructure, because garbage in produces confidently wrong variance flags. Crucially, require named human owners with explicit approval thresholds for any agent touching budget or compensation. You have to audit governance maturity quarterly, treating agent output like a junior analyst's first draft. And finally, sequence cross-functional orchestration absolutely last, only deploying it once those foundational agents are fully stable. This brings us to the heart of our investment thesis. A management layer that used to scale linearly with headcount can now scale sublinearly, changing the unit economics case. For Series B and C companies specifically, this is where the hidden alpha lies. McKinsey actually estimates that AI-powered workflow redesign could add roughly $2.9 trillion in annual economic value. Two operating companies with identical management headcount can carry very different structural risks, depending on how much of that headcount is doing coordination work an agent could already perform. So we leave you with this final provocative question for your diligence processes. Are you still evaluating operating leverage based on outdated headcount proxies rather than AI stack deployment maturity? Capital has become highly commoditized, but the infrastructure to execute high-trust, cross-border deal flow is rare. To get ahead of these macro signals and access our premium investor network, subscribe to the Upside Journal and join our membership communities. See you in the next Daily Drop.